So today we're going to talk about social entrepreneurship, and that really means many different things to many different people. It's not something new. I mean, there are organizations like the Salvation Army that have been around for years and years that do billions of dollars a year in social entrepreneurship. But the term itself is fairly new, and I like this definition. Basically, it says a social entrepreneur recognizes a social problem and uses entrepreneurial principles, and that's the key term for me, principles there, to organize, create, and manage a venture to make a social change. So I'm not going to share some of these national stories. I'm just going to talk story about some of the ventures that I worked on over the last 10 years here in Hawaii. So I think Sheila talked a little bit about my backstory, and I think it makes sense to share a little bit more because it's hard to understand what I do unless you kind of see where I've been. And that kind of gives you some insight in why I do what I do. So before I show you some other stuff, I want to start with a couple of pictures. I had a dog growing up. Her name was Lonnie, and she was very, very mellow. That's not me, yeah. But when I saw this picture, I thought this really was remarkable because it was everything that I was not. You know, I wasn't confident, I was very shy, I stood by myself and played with myself, and I was very quiet, unlike this kid here. And I actually had 3 sisters, so I found another picture that would be more realistic. Like if my 3 sisters and I were left alone with permanent markers, this is more likely to be me, the baby. Yeah, of course, this is not me too, fortunately, yeah, so, okay. So off to some real pictures. So Sheila mentioned that I lived in a couple of public housing projects, first one being Palolo Housing, and the second one being Kohio Park Terrace. And how many of you guys have been to Kohio Park Terrace here? This is the state's largest public housing. How many of you have been to a public housing here? So we've got less than 20% of the folks that have ever even been in a public housing. So that's my family, at least part of my family. It's the actually only picture I have of my dad and us. We didn't have a camera growing up. My mom on the left is from the Waimanalo homestead. My dad immigrated here from Ilocos Norte in the Philippines. And shortly after this picture was taken, my father passed away. So life became very, very difficult for us. And I get asked a lot from folks that have never been on public housing land before, what was it like growing up? And the best thing I can do is sort of share a couple of stories. I used to joke a lot. I used to joke that we would get our toys from the Goodwill, and one day my mom brought home the game Operation, and we didn't have batteries, so I rigged it to a car battery, and I tried to get my sister to go first, which she didn't. But then as I've gotten older, I've been more honest about what it was like to really grow up in KPT. So the first story I'll share happened when I was about 9 years old. I had some chalk, and I was on the sidewalk just minding my own business and drawing. And I felt this sharp stinging on the back of my head. So I started rubbing my head, and I turned around, and I saw these 2 neighbor kids run back into their home. And I was just starting to get more and more sore, so I kept rubbing it, and I was wondering why it got so sticky. Then I looked down, and my entire shirt was covered with blood. I got stabbed with a piece of metal. So I went back home. I was about 9, so of course my mom's freaking out. But what happened next really I think about often, because it's what happened next that really shocked me into what it was like growing up into the housing. She didn't call 911. She called her pastor. And she called her pastor for a couple of reasons. One is she didn't have a car. So of course I needed to get to the ER, and she needed someone to drive me. But she called him because she too needed help. Like she too needed some comfort. And now that I'm a dad, I can't imagine what it's like to not be able to protect your kids. But this is the environment that I grew up in. It was full of violence and things that weren't good. And some of these things still happen to folks there. And so it's not easy to live in public housing. It isn't just a number or a statistic. But it wasn't all bad. Anybody recognize this picture? I got a free Kano t-shirt if you do. So this is a computer from 1981, a Texas Instrument TI-994A. My mom, the same pastor that drove me to the ER 2 years later, loaned my mom $100 that she paid off over a year to buy me a used TI-994A. I was 11 at the time. I have no idea why she did this. Nobody really had computers, so I was the first geek of KPT. But I remember going to the library, and there were 6 books, only 6 books in the entire library about computer programming, so I borrowed them all, and I taught myself how to program. And you can see I used a cassette recorder to record. We didn't have a disk drive, so I recorded the code by volume, not by bits. And, but I share these 2 stories because these are the 2 things that I think shaped my work in social entrepreneurship. One being sort of the perspective of living through poverty for most of my pre-adult life. And then 2 is having the fortune of being introduced to technology at a really young age. And so that's why I've used technology to help solve some of the social problems that I've encountered. Okay, so I still struggled. On the left are the high schools that I either dropped out of or tried to complete. So I attended Farrington, Waipahu, Campbell, and Pearl City. So I've got probably 20% of the folks here covered with alumni. And I wasn't a good student. So I think there were times where my alcohol blood content level was probably higher than my GPA. Sad but true, but not hard when you get all Fs. But I actually made it all the way to the end where I was the youngest fellow at the East-West Center as an undergraduate. And this is my strange way to becoming an academic fellow. I went through 4 schools, I joined the Navy Reserves, I started at a community college and ended up moving up to the fellowship at the East-West Center. But I didn't consider myself a good student. I was always interested in ventures. And so while I was in college, I started a bunch of ventures. I started a bartending school, an import company, and the one that I'm going to share is one that I think really gave me the boost of confidence that I think I needed. And it was a company called URL. So during my senior year, 5 friends approached me to join their startup. And the startup was called URL. It was in 1995, the beginning of the World Wide Web. And they decided to build a database system. And so 4 of the 5 had doctorate degrees, and I didn't. So I invented one for myself. I called myself a PhD, or part Hawaiian dude. So, which I still am. Our business tanked. Our business idea actually made no sense, and we failed at doing what we set out to do. But we stumbled upon a niche, and that niche was globalization, web globalization. So I authored a couple of platforms at WorldPoint, and one was one that Fortune 500 companies used to build multilingual versions of their website. So it was a platform that was connected to thousands of translators around the world. So it's really neat to see. So as companies like Disney would upload their work, we would see in real time the work getting parsed out in country to France or Germany or Japan or Russia. And those translations were done, and MIT adopted the technology too for their digital media lab for translations. And my 2 takeaways from this was, one, that even in Hawaii, we can achieve greatness and innovation in technology. So in 1998, I was at Internet World, and I presented our technology, and we entered our technology to the competition. I didn't expect to win. I don't think I gave a really good presentation, but we won Best of Show, and so that was a sort of validation. Not only did we get the clients, but we also got accolades and press from that. But what it did do, the second takeaway was, if you guys are interested in entrepreneurship, it's really lonely. I was married at the time. I was traveling like crazy. I was in and out of a couple dozen countries and not spending a lot of time at home and really ignoring my relationships at home, not just with my wife, but with my family. And so I decided to drop it all and join the Peace Corps, sort of reset my life. So my wife and I packed up, and it took a year to get out of this company because I left at the prime, so we were operating in several countries and things like that, and headed off for the Peace Corps, where I started my first social venture. So I studied Spanish in school, my wife also, and so we expected to go to a Spanish-speaking country, so the Peace Corps sent us to Russia. So I arrived in Russia only knowing one word, vodka, so I knew I was in trouble. Yeah? But so I got there, I learned the language, took about 3 months or so, then I could speak enough Russian to start getting in the community. And I think it's, oops, sorry about that, I skipped over one slide.